Starting a new business is like taking off a rocket. It's expending 70-80% of its fuel before it ever moves an inch.
I leaned into character. The people who are honest about mistakes. Like, mistakes are going to happen. So I never punished on mistakes.
Luck is for the prepared. You can't take advantage of a lucky situation if you're not prepared to take advantage of it.
You do something you're good at, you're happier, you're satisfied. God's gifted you with those things. Utilize them.
Hello and welcome to the Built to Lead podcast. I got a great guest for you today. I'm really excited to introduce him, and I think he's going to have a lot of value to bring to us today. So I'll welcome Nathan Neudorf. He is the MLA for Lethbridge East. He is now the Minister of Affordability and Utilities, as well as the Vice Chair of the Treasury Board, which means that he is number 2 in command of the $72 billion budget that is Alberta's budget. So, that's not very much weight to deal with, and not a lot of opinions that people have about how that should be dealt with. But he is also, in his previous life, I guess, multiple business owner, serial entrepreneur, a father of 5, and a dear friend. So it's really exciting. Thanks for coming on, Nathan.
Thanks, Jory. Really, really great to be here. Really excited about this and having a conversation with you. I appreciate all that you bring as well to leadership in so many different ways. So
I do my best, but I don't. Well, but we'll see who has more influence ultimately in the long term. I think you're a little bit ahead.
My staff tells me all the time it's not a race, but everything's a race.
Yeah. Well, as an entrepreneur in your past, and I know very well myself, it's always a race. Yeah. That's you can say it's not a race. I'm still racing.
Exactly. And you're doing great.
Perfect. So, can you just kind of bring us up to speed on your backstory? I think you've done a lot in your career already at this point, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned on that. So we'd just love to know that backstory.
Yeah. Thanks, Jory. I'm 50. Just to give you some context, just 50. Yeah. And I was married at 20. So we've been married. My wife and I have been married for 30 years. We have 5 kids. Congrats. We actually have 2 grandchildren as well.
Nice.
So that's kind of exciting for us. And we've lived in Lethbridge for the last 30 years. That's where our whole married life has been here. We were born and raised on the West Coast, went to school out there. Both of us went to British Columbia Institute of Technology, BCIT. My wife's a registered nurse, and I'm a civil engineering technologist. So we moved out here. She began her nursing career. I began actually in construction surveying related to my diploma, and then construction. Started businesses there, had a general contracting and finishing company, grew into granite countertops and then commercial cabinets. Did some other different things, had a holding company. We actually started a truffle farm in British Columbia with my dad at one point in time. Cool. The kind you eat, not the kind you bake. And had businesses for roughly 25 years, sold them off, and then went to work for a large commercial contractor, Ward Brothers Construction, as a project manager for many years. So I became, after my CET, I took my journeyman carpentry. And then my Gold Seal project management. So Red Seal carpenter, Gold Seal project manager. And then I really took a right turn and went into politics, which I've now been elected twice, first in 2019, then again in 2023, and been doing that for the last 5.5 years. So kind of a growth trend in different fields, different aspects. With 5 kids, spent a lot of years coaching them through different sports, soccer, baseball, watched and helped with rugby, volleyball. They've done all those things. Coached my wife in soccer for a number of years, played soccer for a lot of years, played baseball when I was a kid, tried out for, we were talking earlier, the Montreal Expos when they were still around. That's a long, long time ago. Yeah. Didn't quite make it, but it was an honor to try out.
Yeah, and there.
Yeah, just learned a lot of things through a lot of different positions, being a coach, being a player. Probably learned more through failure in one sense than through success. And it's one of the things I often teach my kids is that if you're always right, you don't actually learn anything. Yeah, you only learn something from being wrong.
Yeah, I love the quote. I'm trying to remember who it was again, but basically, I will learn nothing from anything that I say today.
Right.
I can say everything I want. I'm not going to learn a thing. I need to listen.
Yeah.
Right. And that often means, being taught by failing also.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good. Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, so I'm gonna start asking some questions. So you're civil engineering technologist, and you come here. Did you immediately start a business, or did you work for someone first?
First year and a bit, I worked for a year and a half. I worked for an engineering company. I was a rodman, so very, very basic entry level job, surveying a lot of roads and highways and doing the points every 20 meters so they could cut and fill and haul away and do their paving and all that stuff. Then I was laid off for winter. And it was a time when Ralph Klein was Premier of Alberta, and they privatized all the transportation workers. So all those government employees went to the private sector. So there's no advancement. There was no jobs because it was just totally filled by that shift. And then I found out, like, my father-in-law was a carpenter. My wife went back to BCIT after we were married for an upgrade specialization in her nurse's training to become an ER specialist. And I had to do something to pay the bills. So I worked for him as a carpenter, came back out here and got a carpentry job and did that for a number of years before I had become a journeyman carpenter, at which point that's when I started. So it was probably 5-6 years of working for other people.
Building up your skill sets and kind of figuring out what you're going to do or what you're good at.
And becoming established. One of the things, the old saying is not what you know, is who you know, is really true in business. A lot of the companies I was competing against, I could do better on pricing. I could do better on quality, but they knew the other guy. They went to school with the other guy. So they would hire the other guy and then work with him to try to match my price. So it was really hard to break into that market.
Yeah, I've learned quite a bit about that as of late with our construction company. It's a lot of who's who and who knows who in that world.
Right.
And that's, it's been really interesting learning that, because that's not at all how it really has been in the other businesses I've been in.
Right.
It was like kind of, I'm not going to say shocking, but when you're making big deals, when millions of dollars are at stake, there's a lot more politics to get involved or things that scratching each other's backs or taking care of one another and building up together and again, who you know stuff.
Yeah.
Which definitely shone a light on my lack of networking and connections at that time, which I'm working on. But it really is that way. I think it's worth highlighting that too, that for a lot of people who want to start a business, you kind of have to get yourself figured out first. Like, what's my skill set? What do I actually do well? What am I passionate about? And then learn your way up, especially in a trade like carpentry, or even you had your engineering and stuff like that. But you kind of had to find your place in that world and
you
build
have to
some
build
relationships.
You have to build a reputation, right? Nobody knows who you are. So how do you exhibit your character? How do you exhibit what you value? How do you treat people? How do you, so much of it is not just my current role, but so much of business, I believe, is built on relationship. You can't treat somebody poorly, yell at them, disagree with them, call them names, whatever, however you deal with a bad situation. You can't do that and expect them to come back, right? And business is a huge amount of repeat customers. That's where strength is built. It takes a long time to build that trust, but you can break it very quickly.
Yeah. The short-term versus long-term thinking, like the long-term value and relationship of a customer versus the short-term. A lot of people are really good at sales and they can bring the customers in and get the deals made, but they don't execute well on the back end. And if they're really, really good at sales, they can keep it going for a while, but eventually that comes back around, right?
Absolutely.
And I always joke that I'm absolutely terrible at sales and marketing, but I'm operationally excellent. And that is, we built all of our companies on operational excellence and customer service, not on sales and marketing, which, those things are good too. And we want to add them to the queue as we go and get better at those things. But the reality is a good salesman that's a bad operator will eventually fizzle out, but a good operator that's not as great of a salesman will build slowly and organically by word of mouth. And that reputation, it's huge.
It is. I think it's foundational. And really, really important. And sometimes it gets lost, right?
Yeah, I've thought a lot lately as I've done business. I've been frustrated because the burden of legal and accounting and papering things and like all of that stuff that goes on because we just can't trust one another. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger every year. And the bigger companies and the more people you deal with, there's no trust. And so they instead of finding people they trust to do deals with, they try to use legal to leverage against each other, which really doesn't work. And it costs a huge amount of money, and it slows every process down and everything else.
Yes.
And so like, if you can't have a good reputation, have good integrity, and trust the people you work with and build trust with the relationships, you get slowed way down and bogged down by all these other methods of trying to protect yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it really is, it's sort of making decisions early on, the direction you're going to go and the way you're going to build, and how long you want to be there. And some of our current society isn't used to longevity or permanence, right? It's what can I get really now, really fast, and then I'll do something different tomorrow. But the strength is those that endure and that last, because they're on good foundations.
My dad always says you have to stick around long enough for the moss to grow.
Right.
And it's actually been a really key thing that I've thought about, is that people that are entrepreneurs too, like tend to like be quick changing and aggressive and go after it and pivot quickly and all those things. And you need those skills, but they can grab too many shiny things and get too diversified or go too many directions or quit something and change and move, but nothing ever really gets successful because they don't stick to something consistently long enough for the moss to grow. Right.
Yeah. To be honest, that was one of my challenges. I started a lot of different things and got frustrated with dealing with the same challenges over and over again.
Yeah.
When I sold off the businesses, 2 of them have remained, and those ownership groups have dug in and worked hard and ground it out. And now they're seeing success, huge success that I never realized because I hadn't
stayed in it.
We didn't stay in it as long, right? I was really good at starting, really good at building it up and getting it going. But I got really, really drained with the day-to-day nitty-gritty management of it. And then a whole bunch of different factors caused me to get to the decision to sell. But they bought something that was really good, and they had a good foundation, and they were just able to continue building, slow down that growth rate, and now they're seeing a huge amount of return for that investment.
Upside. Yeah, I've heard another, I think it was Ed Milet, who said starting a new business is like taking off a rocket.
Yeah.
You know, the fuel's pouring in and all the fuel and energy and fire and flames and burning and heat, and it's not moving. It's just sitting there vibrating, and it's like it's expending 70-80% of its fuel before it ever moves an inch to get the momentum to move that giant rocket off the ground. And business is so much like that. And again, having started 3 more and more businesses now, some of them from almost nothing and others from, you know, some sped up starts, it's like that just pure raw energy and focus that's required to get nothing to become something just off that ground, that 1 inch is huge. It's a ton of work, and it's extremely tiring and challenging, and most people burn out there. They didn't have enough juice to get it going off the ground, right? Yeah. And it does say, like, those companies enduring says a lot about your leadership and the foundation that you build, right? Like those guys that came up through, and I know both the guys that are running the businesses that you're talking about are super legit guys that probably have a lot of respect for you and what you poured into them in the early days of their careers.
Well, I'll leave that for them to say, but it was, again, great individuals, great couples, because they couldn't do it without their wives and the strength that provides for them. But they carried on a lot of principles, and grew, and we still talk to this day. It's not as much about the day-to-day decisions, but there are some big just bouncing ideas back. So it feels good that they're still there, that those
and they were the right people. Like you brought in the right people, and you handed it off to right people, and then they endured. And again, whoever gets credit for that, they're getting credit for being the right people, but you attracted and worked with those guys at that time. And that's huge. Like it really is. When companies that get sold or passed on, they don't have a high success rate. Yeah.
So this year's now, I think, we're talking 7, 8, 10 years that we began the sales process. It's over and done, and maybe even 12, 15 years for the first one. So they're doing really well.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I was kind of segueing from working and getting your journeyman ticket and all the educating and learning and reputation building to, okay, how did you start your first business? Where did you go with that from there?
So the first business, where was I? We've been out here, been in construction for about 5 years. A friend at the company and I were getting a bit frustrated with sort of the direction the company we were working for, and where it was going and what we were doing, and just wasn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
So we made the decision to step away and start our own thing. And we started, it was Integrity Builders. We started doing cabinet install and finishing work. He had a family connection to a cabinet shop in Coaldale, and we did the cabinet installs there. And then he also had a connection, did some fine finishing for custom homes, and he would hang the doors and do the baseboard. He ran that side. I did most of the cabinet install. We worked on it for about a year, and then right when we were going to incorporate and sign partnership agreement papers and all of those kind of things, he actually went, I just got a job offer to move up in the custom home building side of it and go that direction. And I'm like, we were gonna sign partnership papers tomorrow. So I had a decision at that point to either go with him and be an employee again for somebody else that I had no relationship with, which we had not been working towards for the last year, or take it over on myself. So I had very little money, very little saving. I think I bought the company for $5,000 or something like that.
So a lot of people can relate to that story.
Right.
I think.
So a chop saw and a vacuum cleaner and a skill saw or something. Very, very small, humble beginnings. And we continued to build it through the cabinet install. We did that a lot all across Canada, into the US, even a little bit, installing different things. I took it from installing for one cabinet shop to 2 or 3 different cabinet shops. We did a lot of brands like the Chatter's hair salons. We installed 40 or 50 of those across Canada. The Ruth Chris, what's the other one? Can't think of the name of the restaurant, but a very well-known restaurant. We did 5 or 6 of them within Alberta. Tony Roma's. We installed Tony Roma's in Alberta, and we even did one in Toronto. And then we did the Ruth's Chris restaurant. So we just really built up a brand. And then we installed for there's some millwork shops out east that were sending to a lot of commercial. When Chinook Mall did their major expansion, I think there's 30 some odd stores in the expansion. We installed the millwork inside of those, 13 of them. And
those like big jobs and big companies, like
big
working
companies
with big corporations and stuff like that.
So a lot of travel. And I think at the peak we were just over 50 employees, which branched into different things. And then that's where we branched out of just some challenges with installing for someone else and how it was constructed and how it was sent to site. And so we branched out and eventually started our own cabinet shop, which is still going on. And then the trend towards solid surface countertops, granite, and
they got popular.
They got really popular there, and it was the new thing. So we branched out into that. We're one of the first shops in Lethbridge to do that, and that's the other one that's endured.
Having known the Kelly that runs that is the beginnings and the process and the machinery and the learning curve and the risk and all that, like having watched all that go as he went, because I kind of became closer with him when he kind of was buying it out and taking it on his own. And again, that's for him a very scary time and a lot to learn and to do. But watching them go through that, like that's tough stuff. Like that's not.
And we didn't know anything about it. So huge risk, right? Like
we don't even know what the risk is.
We didn't even know what the risk is. Like, who knew that slabs of rock, which was what granite countertops are, on the back of a trailer, bouncing on the highway, those countertops are going to break at a pretty high frequency. Oh, we had to pay for that. Breakage was major. And how to transport them, how to carry them. I don't know. People realize, like, those countertops are heavy.
Oh, yeah.
Some of them are massive. You can't. Some of the stuff Kelly and I did.
700 to 1,000 pound counter.
And 2 of us lifting 1,000-pound countertop into place is insane. You just don't do that anymore.
No.
But we did it because we didn't know better.
Yeah.
So we've learned a lot and how to cut it and shape it and polish it and transport it, how to repair it, how to strengthen it. how to core holes in it so that they're aesthetically pleasing. Some of our first holes, including some in my house, it's about 2 inches here and about 2.5 inches there. And if you look carefully, you can see it's not even. And that stuff drives me crazy.
Yeah.
They don't have that problem now. We get it right.
Oh, for
now.
sure. But like, that's just how you start. Like,
Yeah.
And again, entrepreneurs, like the level of risks that they accept, whether knowingly or unknowingly, is huge. And most people just can't even fathom like that concept that like, I don't know anything about granite countertops, but we're going to figure it out and we just start.
Yeah.
Right. And that is a huge step to take. It's a lot to handle. But some people just, they believe in themselves on the level of being able to overcome.
Yeah.
Right. You just trust that I'm going to be able to do this.
And there's some, to be honest, in the first granite trip, there's some divine providence too. We were trying to reach out to somebody and we kept trying to call him. He was a traveling salesman all over Western Canada. He's never in Calgary. One day we called him. He said, like, how did you get this number? I said, well, we found it through this or that, the other. Are you around? He said, listen, I was just gone for 3 weeks of sales. I'm in my office today and I'm gone tomorrow for 3 more weeks of sales. If you can be here in an hour, we'll talk. And we were able to do that and set up a whole new contract. It's changed the entire trajectory from a declining provider for us, a supplier for us out of Calgary, taking a step to one of the top 3 in Calgary and totally changing the trajectory of everything we did. But
and that supply chain, but it's just that right moment, right place, right time needed to go that way.
And some of that stuff happens, whether people like it or not.
Well, businesses are made and broken off of random situations. Like I know some people is like, why are you in this business? Well, I ran into this guy and I didn't know him and he was at a hockey game. And then I thought that was a good idea and we connected and off I went.
Yeah.
Right. And you're just like, that's how. That's
so striking while the iron's hot.
Yeah, for sure.
Or having the boldness to take a step. Because if you don't take it, that step's not there tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we did that. We did that a lot and had some good times, had some really rough times.
Well, you can get burned on those deals too.
Yes.
There's a saying that I've heard recently that really impacted me, and it's that luck is for the prepared.
Right.
Right. And it's like when you're prepared, and it's not even prepared like I have everything together to do what I need to do. I'm prepared to take a risk, or I'm prepared to say yes, or I'm prepared to, because I believe in myself, or whatever it takes. There's a different kind of preparedness, but you can't take advantage of a lucky or a positive situation if you're not prepared to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, we saw it in sports all the time, right? They call good players lucky. You know, the good players create their own luck because they're forward visionaries. They're looking where to go. They go there before the puck gets there. They go there before the ball's thrown. All those kind of things, right? In many aspects, you do create your own luck. And you're right. It's by being prepared. It's by being willing. It's not being afraid to take that step. Right?
Yeah. And just betting on yourself, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of times it's a big bet. You said you had gotten up to 50 employees. You don't get to 50 employees, as I well know, by not having good leadership and people skills. What role do you think leadership played in the business building process for you? Like what did you learn? Were there any stories that you're like, okay, this is when I figured it out almost?
Yeah. So a lot of it, as you know, you have to trust people because one person can't actually lead 50 in a really good way on their own. There's leaders of leaders. And you have to empower people to do that. So building, like I said early on, building relationships, knowing who you can trust. And I leaned into character. The people I could trust, the people I could talk to, the people who did what they said, the people who were honest about mistakes. Like mistakes are going to happen. So I never punished on mistakes because people are going to make mistakes. We focused on solutions and we focused on honesty and those kind of things. And then trying to manage a better process so we could limit the number of mistakes or human error that occurred. But people that were lying or dishonest or hiding things, for instance, in a cabinet shop, if somebody makes a mistake but tries to hide it when you first cut the wood, then it goes to get edge taped, and then it goes to sanding, and then it goes to finishing, and then it goes to assembly. If that mistake is early on, it just gets multiplied.
Yeah, it's you're
increasing your cost.
Increasing your
and loss,
sunk costs.
So we're like, don't hide it, because now we have to not just pay for the new piece of material. We have to repay for all the labor and material that edged it, all the labor that went into sanding it, all the labor and materials that went into finishing it, and all the labors that went into half assembling it until they found that it wasn't the right size. So now we have to go back and fix 5 things.
Yeah.
Where the sooner we catch that, then we're only fixing 3 or 2 or 1. And so that's what that character, that honesty, that leadership. And we invested for a time. We actually went through character development programs, modules. We did some recommended reading. Not a lot of people are readers. They didn't really do the reading.
Yeah, I've had some challenges with that too.
But we found the most success in talking through scenarios. What does it mean to be honest? What does it mean to discipline correctly?
Yeah,
because that's hard, right? People get offended really quickly when you're saying you're doing that wrong.
Yeah, well, being a good leader when you're dealing with conflict is actually some of the hardest leading that you're going to do. It's the tough situations that really shows your colors as a leader, or how good you are as a leader, and
how you treat people when things go badly, who you blame, right? Or do you take responsibility and say, that's my fault as the owner, operator, leader, because I didn't train you, or I didn't forewarn you, or I didn't prepare you. And rather than blaming you so I can feel better, and then you being disgruntled to the point where either we correct the relationship or it breaks down and you quit.
Yeah. I always think such a great technique to look at what you could have done differently first and lead with that. Yeah. It's like, whatever the instance is, the guy cuts the board wrong and then it gets hidden and it goes through the process. And now we're going to have a conversation about this. Okay. Yeah. It's like, all right, but there's 2 parts in this mistake that happened. I'm going to lead with my part. Right. Like, I clearly didn't make it clear to you, and I didn't teach you, or I didn't show you so that you had a good understanding of why this is such a big deal. Yeah. And so you didn't call it out early because I didn't set you up for success in that way. And I could have done better. And I'm going to make sure that happens right now. Right. You could have done this and this and this, right? Yeah. And if you get a little bit vulnerable with people, or just open and honest, there's a lot better ways to communicate and deal with things. But people don't want to take responsibility. Right. No, they don't. And nor do they want to be made to look foolish, right? Yeah. Ask a question. Great. I asked this question and this person made fun of me, so I'm never going to ask a question again. Mm-hmm. We really had to work on that culture to say, why are you asking that question? Because if we're not understanding why you asked it, obviously we didn't train you to know the answer to that. Yeah. So those kind of culture things really matter. Yeah. Especially for young people. Yeah. As we've gotten bigger, I've really realized too, like even from difference between 30 to 50 to 150 to 200, your mid-level management and mid-level leadership is the thing that you quickly realize that you're letting too loose with, because these people they haven't had enough leadership training, or they're new to a position that they're in, or they've worked their way up, but they don't have experience leading other people, and they're just going to do what's worked for them in the past. So if yelling works for them in the past, or that's how they were raised, that's what they're going to do. If berating people is how they were treated at their previous job and that worked, then they're going to do that. And they're just using their experience, good or bad, to create leadership skills when really they need to be taught. Leadership is just as technical as any trade or any education system you can get. Like, you could do 4 years of leadership and still not have seen a quarter of what there is to gain in that industry, right? Absolutely. And understanding people are different. Mm-hmm. Every individual is different, and there are common traits or common strengths, but each individual is unique. So being able to say, what's your learning style? I've worked with some incredibly talented carpenters and tradespeople. They don't read well at all. I don't like it. They've never done it. Mm-hmm. It's not their strength. So obviously I can't just give them a booklet of instructions, say, read this and go do it. Yeah. That doesn't work. Yeah. Especially in the trade world, when people work with their hands, like often they went that direction because this isn't the thing I like. I like working with my hands. So then they're excellent at their job, but they're not a book person. So taking the time to show them once or twice, and then they've got it. Yeah. Right. So that requires a patience, and it requires an ability to understand and really see an individual. Yeah. Like, listen to them. And often too, in points of conflict, they would say things and you're going, what does this have to do with the problem we're having here? But as you talk them through it and work them through the language, you
you begin to understand that they had a fight with their spouse in the morning, which caused them to be late to drop their kid off for school, which caused them to be late for work, which caused them to forget their tools at home.
Then they were rushing.
Then somebody got mad at them at work, and then they weren't thinking straight, and they read the tape measure wrong. And all of these things were all linked to, dude, you just need to take a little bit of time off this weekend and work things through with your spouse, and you're going to be in a way better mindset because you don't make these mistakes. And it doesn't really have anything to do with work today at all.
Mm-hmm.
It actually had to do with work with something else. And having patience with people is huge, because if you don't, I've found those high pressure systems just deteriorate, right? Relationships are like bank accounts. If you continually withdraw, and they get frustrated, and they stop talking about what their problems are. They stop talking about how somebody's treating them, or me as the boss is treating them. And then all of a sudden you're way down the road and they go, I'm quitting. Where did this come from? What happened?
Yeah,
it didn't happen today. Today was the straw that broke the camel's back, but it happened.
Yeah, it was
ago.
Paved a long ways along the way.
Yeah.
Something, and I'll give Craig Groeschel credit for teaching me this, whether it's from him or not, is just having a margin to care. Mm-hmm. I think when we're a high performer and we are hard driving and we're getting a lot done and we're building business and we're doing 100 things all at once, but we also need to be a good leader.
Yeah.
If we don't leave ourselves a margin to care, then everything becomes transactional. And my personality type is very analytical, transactional. Right. It's like I'm looking for outcomes.
Yeah, which is probably why you're good operationally.
Yeah, operationally excellent. But when it comes to leadership, we have to have margin to care to people, because we can't lead people if they don't trust us and if we're not invested in them.
Yeah.
Right. And so in order for you to know anything about that person and get to the bottom of the root of it, and I've discovered and read even that 99% of conflicts at work are related to interpersonal or personal issues. It's completely nothing to do with the job, nothing to do with the situation. Like you have to go to the next level. But if you don't know the person, or you have no understanding or emotional intelligence or awareness of what they're going through, you really can't help them. You can't lead them.
Yeah.
You're handcuffed to that. And so as a leader, you need to understand that I have to have a margin to know my people. I have to be invested in them on some level. I have to have a margin. I was talking to our leader of one of the guys in the mechanic shop today. And I was saying, we don't have a really clean venue for guys to just generally chat about how things are going with them. And because again, they clock in for work and they're on the clock, and now they need to get their utilization up, and they have to get everything to these numbers, and we're all a very hard driving, efficient group of guys, and they're all really high performance people, and that's great, but there's no margin. We didn't give anyone a margin to care, to visit, to chat, and like it's open door policy, but if you're got your hands in an engine and you just want to have a quick conversation because you feel like you're out of the loop on how the company's doing and you'd really like to know, that's not that important compared to me staying on the clock and getting this done. But where is the time for that to happen?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And our society's changed a lot. I said it just the other day, 50 years ago, families were far more interconnected, like different generations of family, and everybody had a cousin or a grandparent or somebody close by to help out with whatever. And almost everybody in society went to a charitable, either a Christian organization or some faith-based organization, or a club or a crew or something. They were just part of an organization. So they got that. We don't have that now. And a vast majority of families are broken or fractured in some way. So where do you go for that interpersonal support, that socialization? Because whether you're the hardest rock of an island introvert guy, you still need it.
Yeah, you still
need something,
share and have like
something
camaraderie, and
whether it's the band you like or the food you like or whatever, you need that connection to society. We are not islands as much as we try to be them. So people go to work. They spend more time at work than they spend anywhere else.
Yeah.
And if those relationships aren't safe, if they aren't mutually respectful, if they aren't trusted, they're not going to anchor. And they're not going to grow.
That's why culture is so important. And I think about this so often, like what you talk about. I've talked to my wife about this at length within our family and in our friends. It's like, okay, well, Again, we go to church and we connect with a group of, if like, take the religious side out of it. I'm going to a community of people that have generally the same values in me, and we're spending time in proximity with one each other and creating relationships. Yeah. That's happening there. Okay, what is the average person who's not connected to any kind of religious group? Where are they getting their community and their connection from? And it's like, okay, as other parents, I take my kid to school and I meet other parents. And so we're demographically there, but there's a wide variety, and we don't necessarily unify or connect on values there. Yeah. Sports, same sort of thing. Do we go to the bar on the weekend? Single people spend a lot of time in these other scenarios, but it's like you're not connecting with people that are unified on your values and believe what you believe and follow that organizational community, which is culture. You're looking for people with the same culture as you. Well, if your business has a very strong culture, then only people of the right culture in there, then you have that safety, you have that connection, you start building friendships and relationships in business. Whereas if culture is not cared about whatsoever by the business or organization or whatever group it is, then you're with random people who you don't align with, and so you don't build friendships and relationships and comfort.
And then you go back to that transactional. I'm here for 8 hours to get paid that, and 1 second past that, I'm not invested. One thing outside of the contractual agreement, I'm not doing.
Yeah, I'm done. I'm not.
And then you have all kinds of things fall through the cracks because somebody called mad at you, wasn't their area. They wrote you a note, it fell off your desk. It's not their fault, it's your fault. And
because no one really cares because it's transactional.
Right.
And a lot of ass covering.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Totally. Because they're looking for, I got to protect my transaction. If I don't have these 8 hours to get that, I got to look somewhere else. I don't want to do that. I'd rather have the one in hand than the two in the bush.
I know. And it kills me when I see that. And why I think it's so important for businesses to build a culture and to build a place where people actually can form friendships and make these small teams that become communities, because people actually need it. And in our Western culture in North America, independence is touted as such an important thing, but it's actually counter to who we are as a communal human beings. We need people, we need our tribe, we need our family. And it's a really rough spot that we've kind of backed ourselves into socially.
Exactly. One really interesting thread from this conversation, if we wanted to go explore it, is one of the number one challenges facing Canada today is productivity. And it links back to this issue. Yeah. Because in Canada, about 80% or more of the businesses in Canada are small businesses. Yeah. They haven't been able to make the step to big business, where and largely it's on the number of employees you employ and the gross domestic product that you sell, those kind of things. The United States is twice our productivity, and they have less than 50% of their businesses are small. That means 30 to 40% of their businesses are taking the step to become big. You can't do that if you don't trust, if you don't have a team, if you can't grow. And I've seen it time and time again. You have 10 employees, you get up to 15, things go wrong, you lay off a bunch, you go back to 10, you're comfortable, start making some money again and go, we should expand. And then it just doesn't work.
This is half the reason this podcast exists, is because I've seen so many people get going in their small business and then hit one of these roadblocks or negative situations and then go back, and whether they end up shutting their business down or never grow it any further, they get burned and they don't want to do it anymore. And there's ways to overcome these things and grow into that, but like so many people just don't get past these kind of blockades.
And it is now almost the number one national issue on productivity, because one of the biggest things in productivity is businesses reinvesting in their employees for training and reinvesting in technology and equipment. But small businesses can't afford to do that.
No.
Like really good machinery and equipment and really good training for your staff is really expensive.
Super expensive, yeah.
So if you don't have that mass of dollars, you can't do that reinvestment. It just doesn't work. Yeah. To take a construction company that builds houses to a modular home where you're going from 20 or 30 or 40 houses a year to 400 or 500, you need a big building. You need some big equipment and machinery. You need big stuff.
And the things that make you faster and more profitable take huge capital investment, and small businesses, they can't do it. They just can't do it.
So you look at it, no wonder the US is double our productivity. Are they smarter? Are they more capable? No, none of those things. But they have more dollars to invest.
I was going to say it's a lot easier to borrow money in the States than it is in Canada too, which isn't the main factor.
There's a
but
lot of
there's
factors, and there's a lot of
factors.
government factors too on whether it's financing or rules, the safety rules, the codes.
It takes the wind out of people's sails for sure, as you well know. In
it's
your
hard.
line of work now, it's like business owners get frustrated and they just lose momentum because they get bogged down by all the limiting facts. You can't do this, you can't do that. These things just kind of slow everything down, and then they give up. Like, why?
Exactly. Right? Yeah. And it's really hard. So that's why government policy is so critical.
Yeah. It's so wild. I didn't realize that was such a big thing. It makes sense logically to me, like, because we're so much smaller. We have such a big area of land with fewer, thinner people in places, and we don't have as much money flowing into investment, all these other things. Yeah. But that big of a gap is wild.
Yeah. And Alberta is at the top. 9 out of the last 10 years, Alberta has been the top. This year, Northwest Territories, because they've done a lot of growth work with their mining and a very, very small population, they've passed Alberta. And we've also had a massive surge of population, which we've got a bit of a lag.
So that like GDP per capita?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah. So, and we're propped up, to be honest, we're propped up with our oil and gas because it's so lucrative that it artificially increases those numbers.
Yeah, it's huge dollars.
We take those numbers out, we're still the leader, but by far less. But we've got to do more. We've got to do more in construction. We've got to do more in shipping and manufacturing. We've got to do more in healthcare.
More productivity with less people.
We've got
Which is, again, both us and the States have extremely low unemployment.
Yeah.
For them, like especially Alberta.
Well, ours is high right now.
Is it?
Again, linked to the massive influx of immigration.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a lag to absorb them into the workforce, because unemployment it's a bit of an interesting statistic, because it's how many people are looking at this point in time. And often they'll get incorporated into the workforce, just not on their first desired job. So
there's a lot of we are, you mean?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers of complexity, and it can depend on supports. A lot of first-time newcomers to Canada or Alberta, they'll be on a government support. They'll take some English training or some secondary training, and there's a natural time lag before they can really enter the workforce. For really legit reasons.
What you're saying is the biggest reason that we're struggling with an unemployment number would be because of immigration. But even I would say, again, I'll ask this rather than say it, but from a historical standpoint, we have still much lower unemployment.
Historically, yes.
Ever.
Yeah.
Which is pointing to we don't produce enough for the amount of workers we have, right? Like if unemployment were skyrocketing, it would be because we got more productive with less workers.
Yeah.
Potentially.
And one of the things that we're looking at is supply chain. Okay. Right. Like there's lots of issues where we know Canada and Alberta are natural resource rich, but where are we shipping it to get produced? Whether we're talking about oil or gas or lumber or coal. I mean, that's a controversial one, but metallurgical coal, which is used to make steel, that is mined in Alberta and BC, gets shipped to China to be converted into steel product that we buy back at multiple times that cost.
Oh yeah, I've done the narrative of that. So yeah, we dig the coal out of the ground, we put it on a truck that goes on a train to the ocean onto a barge, and then it does all that, and then it comes all the way back here. It's like this is the craziest thing of all time.
Whether it's potash in Saskatchewan, uranium, diamonds, like you go down the list, Canada has incredible natural resources. We need to produce more of that here. Production as in we've got the natural resource. Now what are we making of it?
Yeah, creating finished product out of it.
Let's create finished product.
Whether it be manufacturing, processing, whatever. Yeah, it's for sure. I was talking to a guy, and I can't remember the country now. He was a rep for one of our tire suppliers, and he was from a country across the ocean. And he was talking about his country and another country and another country. And basically, one country was resource rich. One country did all of the processing, manufacturing, and another country shipped. Like it had to go through that country to get out.
Right.
And he said, which one do you think is the wealthiest country? The one that produces everything.
Right.
Why not the commodity country? Well, because they need the production. They can only sell it to the people that can produce. No one else is buying it.
Right.
Right. And so they said, this country's super wealthy. This country's doing okay. And this country's broke.
Yeah.
And it's all just because of who does the processing and the manufacturing of the product.
And that's why I think like these are some questions that will take national leadership. whether the provinces all get together at that level or whether there's a federal government that really invests in critical infrastructure across the nation to develop these supply chains. We've got the lumber, but we ship it to the US or to Japan or Europe, and we keep the worst stuff here. We need to really think about, what are we producing? What do we have that in our natural resources?
How do we improve our system and get out of our own way in a lot of the cases to stop over-regulating or stopping people who want to invest that thing?
And retain that wealth here.
Yeah, scare away investment. That's another thing often, like when it's unstable or they don't have confidence that can be done here. Or I imagine too, like some of these big investors or manufacturers or whatever struggle with the lack of population to do some of the things that they need as well.
Yeah.
And there's just the spatial situation that we're in. We having mountains and different terrain and weather and all that. Like being in transportation, I know how big of an effect that has on the supply chain.
For sure.
Right?
And that's like some really key advantages that the Europe and the UK have over North America is huge populations, really tiny land space.
It doesn't take it much to get it there and move it around.
So they've got different challenges, right? And that's fair, but we're not moving.
I think we could. Yeah, there's so much for us to improve upon. There's just, how do we not?
These are our challenges. Let's solve our challenges rather than complaining that someone doesn't have the same 100%, ones, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That doesn't do us any good. I think the more we can be solutions oriented, collaborative, work together, realize that what are the strengths of Canada, what are the strengths of Alberta, and continue to build on those. One of my favorite leadership books to this point is StrengthsFinder. And the basic philosophy is that, listen, we all have strengths and weaknesses. You can spend a lot of time and energy on your weaknesses to have strong weaknesses. Or you can focus on things that your natural strengths, allow others to do things that they're strong at that you're not. And if you develop those, then you have strong strengths.
Yeah.
That's basically specialization.
Do you remember who the author is of that book?
No, I should.
I'm like, if it's Patrick Lencioni or Marcus Buckingham, because both of them talk about similar topics.
I don't, and I should know.
Yeah, Marcus Buckingham is from, I believe he was either Australia or the UK. But he focuses on that, and his concept is that the best, highest performing leaders or people are what he calls spiky. So they have really, really strong strengths, and they lean into those strengths, and then they beat everybody.
Yes, because
they're so strong up to. They're not focusing on improving their weaknesses.
No.
They're going, I'm great at this. I'm the Michael Phelps of bartending. And so I'm going to be the best bartender in the world. And I'm going to use my specific key things to do that. And then those are the people that really explode.
And it's interesting because it's tied to mental health. You do something you're good at.
Yeah.
You're more productive. You're happier. You're satisfied, and you get a better return on it. Whereas if you spend a lot of time on your weaknesses, you don't do it well, you're not happy, you're continually frustrated, and you're not getting a good return because other people do it better than you. So why do we do that? Like it's a major factor in the domino effect of saying you're going to be healthier, you can be happier, you're going to be more satisfied, you're going to be more successful doing something you're good at.
Yeah.
That God's gifted you with those things. Utilize them.
Yeah.
Don't go looking for something else that you don't have.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. That's a really good point. I see we could talk for 8 hours, so I'm going to try and get us refocused here. So yeah, you had multiple businesses and you exited and you worked for another one. What I want to kind of touch on here is you're transitioning from being in the private sector and in the business world and then moving into politics. I know you and I have talked about it on personal levels at multiple times, but just kind of sharing being called into that, and then also what's starkly different that I think a lot of entrepreneurs maybe wouldn't understand, and what leadership skills and you used from the private sector to the public sector, and the ones that you had to change and get better at.
Right. Really good point. So a lot of public sector, it's about giving back. It's about serving, serving the community. We had, if you know Alberta and Alberta history at all, we had conservative governments for many years. Then in 2015, we had a different government elected.
Different is right.
And I got really tired. Construction's blue collar, and a lot of conversations complaining about government. And I just got tired of it. I don't want to complain all the time. I'm not happy. People around me aren't happy. It doesn't solve anything, doesn't change anything. So I decided that I'm not going to live a life of complaint. I'm going to step up and step forward and see if I can make a difference.
Yeah.
Fortunate enough, I've got a unique journey of how I got into it, but let's just say that in 2019, my name ended up on the ballot, and I was fortunate enough to win. And people say, was it what you expected? I actually don't really remember knowing what to expect. I knew where I was going to work in Edmonton in the legislature. I knew we were going to pass laws, legislation, and regulation. No idea how that process worked.
Yeah.
No idea what it meant to get up in question period, ask a question, give a member statement, debate bills, how little influence I actually had on the creation of a bill, and when to utilize that little bit of time to the most dramatic effect in the most productive way. So, and then realizing that you don't just serve the people that voted for you and elected you, you serve all the people, even those that really don't like you. And so the leadership, one is you're in front of people a lot more. You're in the public eye a lot more on TV, social media, the cameras, the newspapers, the radio stations, high level of criticism and critique. And our generation, our age, particularly through social media.
Yeah, just the new ability to critique and see and touch everything that we see now.
And they don't want to listen to an hour explanation.
No.
You got 30 seconds or less. A lot of problems that we face can't be solved in 30 seconds or less, or explained in 30 seconds. So that's really hard. To be perfectly honest, it's really hard. I like having long, in-depth conversations, talking through issues, looking at the different pathways available to us. At some point, you have to make a decision. I tell people all the time, when you vote, you don't get to vote 70% for and 30% against.
Yeah.
It's yes or no. That's it. There are times and places where you can amend things or speak to things, but we all know life isn't just black and white.
No.
And it's hard to get that nuance and that gray. Solve this problem. Okay, I can't.
Well, and the people asking you to solve it typically don't know 5 to 10% of the nuance of what goes into that problem. And the person asking you is on the right or the left of that problem.
Yeah.
And so they think they know how the problem needs to be solved. And then there you are in the middle with all the details going, there's no perfect solution to this. Someone's going to be upset. Exactly.
And I appreciate everybody has their opinion and their viewpoint and how they like to get it solved, and their person won or didn't win. Great. It's not unilateral dictatorship from my little seat in Lethbridge East. It's not unilateral dictatorship if I'm a minister of whatever ministry. And it's not unilateral dictatorship whether you're the premier or the prime minister. We work in a democracy. That means the majority of people have to agree with an idea to be able to move it forward.
Yeah.
And there's a legislative cycle. We don't sit every day of the year. We have a fall session and a winter/spring session. And there's an order and a process for which legislation gets brought forward. There's tons of legislation in every province and in Canada at the federal government level that never sees the light of day because other priorities just outweigh that. It's really good. It's really needed. It's really important.
It might be a great thing, but it's just not important enough.
We just can't do everything. And all you have to do is look at the newspapers. What are the top issues for people? The affordability, healthcare, education, personal rights and freedoms.
Yeah.
After that, it really trickles off. So you could have a really, really significant issue tied to good legislation, tied to
really good ideas of how to do it,
and really good ideas.
Time to touch it.
It just doesn't make the top 10.
Yeah.
And how do we change that? Our system is very different than the United States system. The United States, they see tons of regulations and legislation in all of their senates and houses. Very different process. Anybody can bring one forward at any time, and they have to deal with thousands of bills. But how they deal with them is just, this one's up, yes, no, boom, gone.
Yeah.
So it doesn't even get a fair shake because they're just dealing with volume. Our problem's different. We don't have the volume issue, but only a select few are going to go through.
How much you can actually get churned through.
So those are really hard.
Yeah,
and
I would
taking
think
criticism.
It's interesting hearing kind of that perspective. It's like influence becomes a lot more important than it is. Like leadership is influence in a matter of speaking. But there's when I go private sector, I'm somebody's boss and I'm leading them. I have some intrinsic influence with them. I sign their paycheck and they've signed on to me as their leader when they work for my business or whatever. And so we've kind of got a bit of a contract going here, whereas they're going to listen and be on culture, and I can control and assign all those things. But then when you get put into a legislature that's got however many MLAs and people involved and different voices speaking in and out and opposition, and there's a lot more about not being in control, but being influential.
Absolutely. I tell people all the time, I'm glad you brought that point up, is in business, you have more power and authority, right? That responsibility rests with you. In government, you don't have that power and authority, not even as premier or minister. You can direct a little bit more in those positions, but governance is really about influence. It really is. Jory, let's talk about this. Let's talk about minimum wage. How does that impact your business? How does it impact you personally if you go to a restaurant that has more minimum wage earners there? What rate should it be? How should it be implemented? How often and at what increment should it be reviewed? I can't change that. It's not my ministry. It's not my file. It's under a certain act, under labor. That minister is in charge at the direction of the premier. Again, we went through the top 4 or 5 issues in Canada. That's not one of them, but it's really important, really needs to be looked at. How do we influence those people so that
and I have my opinion, and so does the person working at McDonald's who's getting paid minimum wage. Totally. And there's lots of them who have opinions, and each one matters.
And each one matters. And the whether it's a grocery store owner or a factory line worker or employer, like those things have implications, and it's not just
and it has implications on inflation, and like there's so much broader scope of what these things affect that most people don't really think that depth. They're not going, oh, if we raise minimum wage, it's going to add inflation to our cost of groceries, or if we add more carbon tax to our fuel, it's going to inflate the cost of every thing that gets shipped ever.
Exactly.
Right. Like, and there's just all these other factors that don't, when they're passing the legislation, often we're not bringing this to the forefront of the conversation because people don't even they don't get it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't understand it.
Or we have had those conversations, but just in a different place, right? A lot of my life is now public, and my discourse is made public, even what we're doing here. But in the process of legislation, there's committees that can be done under confidence. There's caucuses that talk about these things in confidence. I actually, on becoming a minister, take an oath before the premier of the province, hand on a Bible, that at these times and places, I cannot share or break the confidence of cabinet and those conversations with the general public, with my wife, with anybody. So those are oaths that we take before the law under a judicial system to protect the integrity of government. But people get mad at me when you need to tell me, you need to be transparent. Yes.
It's not quite how it works.
And I want to be transparent, but I am under the law. And unless I disrespect that law, I'm legally obligated not to say these things at this point in time. And people don't understand that. Like, we gave an oath. We swore an oath to govern, and we swore an oath to protect that confidence. So those very important, nuanced conversations take place in a trusted, secure way, so that as we work through and then make a decision, it also gets implemented in a transparent, fair way at the right time.
Yeah, and at all, because it needs to get done at some point too. Like all of the distractions and the questions, they have to be quieted at some point so we can move. Yeah, one of the big reasons I want to have you in here, Nathan, is just because I know, if you want to test someone in leadership, make them go lead people who are volunteers or go lead people who haven't necessarily voted for you, which is a good example here. Have influence on people that didn't agree to work with you necessarily in the first place. That's always way harder. It takes a way deeper and stronger level of leadership. And people who are in government or govern are held to a higher standard, even from, there's a biblical perspective and there's just a general perspective as humans. You know how people hold you to a standard and they put you in the spotlight all the time. And that takes lot of strength. It takes wide shoulders and a strong stance and confidence in yourself to lead and to do well and to control that responsibility with a servant leadership perspective. And so I think a lot of people can gain from that understanding is that the people who have who've gone into politics and for the right reasons, ideally, are doing a great service for the country that is a very hard and not an easy one to stand up to.
And it takes a lot of growth, right? The pressures that face me now are massively larger than when I was running a small business. And those were heavier on me than raising a family. And those were heavier on me than when I was leading in just my relationship with my wife. And those were infinitely harder than when I was just on my own. So there's a growth rate. And just like when you go to the gym, you don't go to the gym for the first time ever and bench press a stack, right? Like you got to work your way up to it. And the learning curve in public sector is very rapid because so many more eyes watching you and critiquing you. And there's less room for error. You make a big mistake, you don't get elected again. And that's really hard in one sense, but growing into it. And I had the fortunate path. It was difficult at the time, but I hit pretty much every rung on the ladder. I was a private member in the back benches. I served on a ton of committees. I was on task forces. Then I became caucus chair. Then I did these things. And then I became a cabinet minister on a file that I knew very well from my construction background in infrastructure. And then I became a cabinet minister and vice chair of Treasury Board after a period of time learning about electricity, which I knew nothing about. And the finances, like my personal finances, my business finances, we're talking hundreds of dollars to thousands of dollars to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now on Treasury Board, we're talking about budgets at $72 billion. Like we're talking big numbers, and billion gets thrown all around a lot nowadays. It's not what most people think it is. When you look at how much $1 billion is, just $1 billion. Yeah, that's a lot. That's more than you could make in a lifetime in most cases. It's incomprehensible. It is. It's such a big number. We don't get it, and we hear billion and trillion, and that's it. It's a lot. And not to abuse that. Like as a politician, you have to learn not to abuse that by snowballing somebody with all these big numbers and fancy words and terms and acronyms, to try to learn it well enough that we can fairly represent it. And a few times it's hard to get there, but saying spend more on whatever the file that you think should be spent more on. Okay, where do we take that from? Do we raise taxes to take it from the taxpayers? This is real money. This is real money. Real people. Comes from real people. So we could spend $1 billion more on whatever your important issue is, but where's that billion coming from? There's 5 million, just under 5 million Albertans. You think about how many dollars that is in taxes per each one per year. It's a lot. Yeah. Or do we take it from another vital file to fund that, or we take a portion from everywhere? But it doesn't matter. A 10% reduction in any file means someone's probably going to get a job reduction or a wage reduction, or those are not easy decisions. And that's why I mean to respect the public by being fair with them, by being honest with them, saying this 1 decimal point move here means that 100,000 people are going to be impacted here. So what's their perspective? Is that right? Is it wrong? Is it wise? Do we do it in a short term or a long term? Suddenly, do we like? And yet not being scared to do what you need to do either. Because I think that for me, like I was sat on a kind of group meeting with the finance minister early on and talking through kind of some of the budget decisions they'd made. And I'm sitting back thinking, okay, I'm a entrepreneur that actually does deal with millions of dollars on a regular basis and understands kind of what that looks like and how to manage it. And I've grown into that. Yeah. And I'm listening to these numbers and these ideas being thrown around going, man, this is overwhelming. I can't even imagine being responsible, accountable, and in control of some of these things, but still not being frozen because I got to move. I got to move. I got to do things. There's things that have to happen and have to be done. And we're moving ahead. This train's rolling, right? Yeah. And you can't freeze up. You got to do what has to be done, and yet know all of those other things that you're talking about in the background and honor them at the same time. And there's no training school for MLA. No. or MP, right?
It's like leadership school.
So yeah, it is exactly leadership. So what do we bring to the table? Yes, you can go to university now and take great courses in political science and understand theory and how to write legislation, how to read it, and how to know the process and the different ideologies that different political parties espouse to, and all of those kind of things. Great, fine. But you know what the best leadership is if you did it.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can write legislation about construction, it's because I lived that life. If I want to write good legislation about electricity, it's because I have immersed myself to understand the people on the ground who are doing these jobs. Why did you build that transmission line there? Mm-hmm. What hoops did you have to jump to do that? Who's paying for it?
Yeah, why does it cost us
what would
much?
What would have been the implications if you didn't do that?
Mm.
All the lost opportunities. Why do we want to generate power by wind and solar for less emissions? What are the challenges? What are the pros? What are the cons? What did that do to people's transmission bills? Because we built it in a different way than we built huge generation from coal, which has now all been converted to natural gas. What does it mean to consider nuclear power for generation for Alberta, where we don't have any mining for uranium now, but they do in Saskatchewan, which is a very strong and close neighbor. There are some deposits in Alberta that potentially, depending on the decisions that we make, could be utilized, but that has implications for those areas. Are those environmentally sensitive areas, or are they an area where all things considered, it would be a net benefit to pursue that mining opportunity? And then, okay, we've got the fuel, and then how do you package it and supply it and manufacture the production so that you can utilize it to generate electricity? What's that all in cost? And how does that compare?
It's a very, very complex thing, right? There's
hugely complex.
No end to the learning. You could spend your whole career on it and not still be the most expert in it.
And that's
you
where
came in not knowing it.
And I came in not knowing it because there's no school for that. And
I was thinking about that from a finance perspective. Like, what exactly would the qualifications be for someone who had any business running a $72 billion budget for a province of people who don't necessarily agree with their political views? Like, it's wildly, there's no way that you can be really prepared for that or have the right qualifications. Yes, okay, I've dealt with lots of money, but was it your money? You know, who were you accountable to when you were operating a bank or whatever these other finance things are? And you might have some experience there, but this is a wholly different thing.
It's totally different. And you're chosen to represent a region of the province for their issues. You're not selected on what skill set should we have for this and who would be the best person to run this. It's not like that.
Yeah, it's a popularity vote essentially before. And then they give you a job. You don't know what kind of minister you're going to be when you get voted in as an MLA.
Or even if I would be one.
Yeah.
Right. So I've been fortunate to hold those roles and to learn those things. But who is a person that you're picking? And that's why my personal preference is not necessarily a party system. The original founders of democracy in the United States said individual representation is really important. And they actually warned against the trend towards a party politic system, because now a lot of people's choice on who they choose to represent them is actually less to do with that individual and more to do with the party and those
the bigger
ideologies
picture items,
and the leader who's going to sort of be steering that party. And that's hard.
Yeah, it is.
That's hard.
Yeah, we all live the challenges and see the dissension and lack of unity that it brings to a country too. And again, each has their pros and cons, but it's a really polarized our society in the last decades.
So what did Winston Churchill say about democracy? It's the worst system out there, except for all the other systems.
Yeah.
So we choose imperfect people to work in an imperfect system to govern as best they can. And that's where individual character, individual accountability, transparency, leadership matters. And all I can try to do is be the best person that I have tried to learn to be. Am I going to make mistakes? Guaranteed. Am I going to get things wrong? Am I going to say things wrong, do things wrong, vote things wrong? Quite likely, because I am not perfect, far from it. But
and
I
that's no
continue to
different
try to
than being a
offer.
business owner, right? Like as soon as you are beholden to a group of people who are trying to lead them, whether you were placed there or voted there or you started a business and ended up there, you're still leading people and you're still human.
Yeah.
And, you're going to have to take risks. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have to, again, ultimately learn and grow through the process. But got to stick your neck out and start. Somebody has to take the lead. And I think a lot of people are scared to take the lead on anything now because there's consequences when you're in leadership. The leader should be really the worst job always because you're going to be the one with your head stuck out when it's time to get a neck chopped.
It's true.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you're doing it right, you're always serving, you're always leading by example, you're always putting the hardest thing on yourself, you're always doing those things. And if you're built to lead, to do that job, then you accept that responsibility and you go out and serve because that's what you were made to do.
Yeah.
And I think that those are the people who are listening to this podcast are the ones that believe that they were built to lead and that they're trying to be the best leader they can. And they know that there's going to be risks and they know there's going to be pain and there's going to be sacrifice and there's going to be suffering, but they're willing to accept that because they know that people need someone to follow and they need to be moved ahead. And if not me, then who?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not selfish, actually. It's that servant leadership. Their success actually lifts all the people that they're leading, right? So it's a very rewarding thing, relationally first, I would say, and then personal character second, and then hopefully financially third. But there is a purpose to it. There's a nobility to it, and honor to choosing to lead and pick up your cross and do the best you can.
Yeah. The leader that we follow in Jesus, he definitely didn't end up with a bunch of money at the end of the tunnel, but he served and made an impact. On my life all this time later. So
same. Yeah.
Cool, Nathan. Well, I've so appreciated this conversation. Again, we could go hours and hours. I think I'd love to get into the details of all the things you deal with because it's super interesting. But it's a leadership podcast, so we're trying to deliver that value to people. And your story is enlightening and uplifting for people that have stuck their neck out and are trying to do well and serve their community, whether it be in business or in politics. And so thank you for the service that you do there. And I love having a guy like you out there serving us as Albertans. I feel that your heart's in the right place and you're doing the best you can for us. So
thanks, Jory. Really appreciate the conversation today.
Yeah. Thanks, Nathan.
Yeah. Bye-bye.